All right, good morning or good evening, everybody. This is Sean VanGordon, so Mayor of Springfield. Welcome to our first 2022 visit with VanGordon. So if you remember, we've been doing this the last couple of, probably a couple of quarters, and just to give us a chance to ask some questions, talk about things that are happening with the city, and just generally have a broad discussion about what's on people's minds and how to go forward from here. So the plan for the evening is going to be that we've got Chief Shearer from the Springfield PD here for the first little while. And then what we're going to do is we're going to excuse Chief Shearer, and then we'll take into, we'll have a chance to get into anything going on 42nd Street, the Main Street Safety Project, the budget, anything that's upcoming from a housing perspective. So before I start by introducing Chief Shearer, what the sort of role of events is, I've got a couple of questions that are a little bit of easy softball questions for the chief. That'll give folks a chance to sort of raise their hand so that we can start bringing people up. And then if you have a specific police only question, then we're going to talk through the police only questions, and then we can move on to anything else that that's on everybody's mind. Neil Ladati, the assistant city manager, is here to help with the logistics. So about bringing folks up, giving them a chance to ask their questions, and then we'll go from here. Hi, Chief.
Sir, how are you doing? Good to see you.
Good to see you too. So, like I said, I've got a couple of questions, and if people want to start raising their hand, then as soon as we get through these couple of things, we can bring some folks up and talk about what's going on with the PD. So you've been intern chief and then permanent chief here for a little while. What's been your favorite part of serving the Springfield community?
I can, without hesitation, say my favorite part of serving the Springfield community is the level of support that this city has for their police agency. From the day that I got here almost a year ago, I mean, there was some folks outside basically here to support police. People consistently on a weekly basis stop by to say thank you. They drop off a box of cookies at the precinct. And I mean, it's really been reaffirming for me in particular, how supportive the community has been here. And I know that the men and women that serve this organization really, really appreciate that. Now, we're not perfect, we're human, we can always do better, and there's things we want to work on, but the level of support has been something that, frankly, it's what largely is what attracted me to Springfield and really want this position. So that's been great. I love that.
You know, you've been a police officer for a long time now. What made you want to get into policing?
That's a great point. I'm going to be totally transparent here, and I know a lot of people will say because they wanted to change the world and, you know, really truly make a difference and all that kind of stuff. I was young and I thought it looked really exciting, and that's why I pursued it initially. And it was. I mean, I had a blessed career. I got to do a lot of really interesting, exciting, neat things throughout my career. And I can't put my finger on when it occurred, but at some point in my career, you know, roughly halfway through my career, after you kind of the fun stuff wears off, you really start to realize how much of an impact you can really have in people's lives. And then for me in particular, as I kind of moved on through my career and took on greater responsibilities with promotions and different job assignments and things, you really got to feel that the impact that you could have on a community and the difference you could make in both the community you're serving's lives, as well as the men and women that are working inside that organization. That's extremely important to me.
Okay. So, like I said before, if people have questions, please feel free to raise your hand. This is designed to be very interactive with the public. So right now we're just going through just general conversation starters. I know we've got a couple of people that just hopped on until we get some people ready to give us some warm-up questions. All right. Favorite eating spot in the city of Springfield?
Well, okay, there's two. I think if you know where the police station is, I like to walk and get food from the office. So we've got Public House right across the street, which is super convenient because there's a bunch of stuff there. And I typically get Hawaiian food over there. That's my favorite at Public House. But I also love pizza. And so we're in close proximity to two different pizza places. So Bartolotti's and Mezzaluna also. And so I probably get more pizza from Bartolotti's because it's a little bit closer, but that's kind of my go-to here locally.
Chief, we hear that you have you are obsessed maybe with some local ice cream shop, and it has caused some controversy in my house over which one is the best.
I'm not going to say obsessed. I think that's a bit extreme. But I got introduced to Handel's ice cream, which I know isn't in Springfield, but I have that way more often than I should. I'm a huge fan, but I really like ice cream. So if people know of other good ice cream shops around town, feel free to put in the chat, and I will go make an effort to hit as many as I can this weekend.
All right, Neil, we've got the first question. If you want to bring Mike up, and then we can give him a shot to ask the question.
Yeah, Mike Cuevla, you're our first speaker, and you should be able to unmute your microphone.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor, for hosting this. My question is directly for the chief. In looking at the use of force report that recently came out, I had a real concern about the number of times that an officer displayed his weapon. I understand that because of the presence of guns in society, that the officers often don't know who they're stopping and whether they might be armed. But there have been a number of situations elsewhere where, for instance, a person was holding a cell phone or an officer drew a gun and then accidentally fired it. I'm thinking of like Philando Castile, who was shot while he was sitting in his car by mistake by the police officer. So can we, is there any way that we think that we can get that number down? Because it just really concerns me that there could be accidental shootings that would be devastating, of course, for the person shot and then also for the officer who made the mistake. Thanks again.
Yeah, that's a great question, sir. I really appreciate you asking that. So we track shows of force, and that's a display of a firearm, a display of, say, a taser, or a deployment of a canine where the canine didn't actually get sent on a person, but the dog is just there. We track shows of force. And I can tell you that the vast majority of police agencies do not track that. So they have really no idea how many times a year that occurs. That's extremely important to us, not just when we use force, but to gather data like this, like our shows of force. And so in 2021, the data showed that we displayed a firearm 70 times. We had, I think, for uniform officer response, like 28,000 some calls for service and 3,500-ish arrests. And we displayed a firearm 70 times out of those, 28,000 calls for service. So the percentage of the time that we do that is very low. But that said, why we capture that information is because we want to look at why that is. What's the information that led the officer to feel the need to display a firearm? What was the type of call they were going to? What was the information that had been shared prior to their arrival? There's a lot of information that officers gather from dispatch, from call takers, from prior knowledge of the person or the location or something that may lead them to believe that they need to display their firearm. And frankly, it may be, I think what that shows is many of those times a person is doing something that leads the officer to believe that they pose a threat to their life or somebody else. And they displayed the firearm and they made the conscious decision to not use it 70 times, but yet they took it out because they felt there was a need to. But we are tracking that very specifically so we can look into that and try to identify any trends. And through training, we want to reduce the amount of times we have to do that, of course, but there are going to be times when it's necessary.
Okay, and thanks, Chief. Thanks, Mike. And again, if you've got questions, feel free to raise your hand. A good follow-up question that I always have is that when we talk about the use of force report, can you talk a little bit about what you sort of have found out about just how jurisdictions differ in how they track this and some of your philosophy about, what we're doing, and is it different than most police agencies, and just how do we deal with the data?
No, that's a good question. So my goal and this department's goal is to be as transparent as we possibly can in sharing the information about uses of force, but we also want to capture as much information as we can so we have good data points to evaluate at year end, determine if there's any troubling trends. Is there training things that we need to provide our officers to better equip them to deal with these situations? Are we facing an inordinate amount of weapons one year compared to the next? So we capture a lot of data, and we're going to be very transparent with that data. But like the mayor said, what you find is, there are thousands and thousands and thousands of law enforcement agencies. And I think it's pretty rare to find any two that capture data on force the same way. Even just trying to compare to other agencies within the state, when you start looking around at agencies' websites and things like that, some agencies have use of force reports, many don't. The ones that do may track less than we do. They may track differently than we do. So it's very difficult to kind of compare agency to agency. And it's unfortunately pretty inconsistent. But I think some of that comes because some agencies have the capacity and the ability, whether it's with new technology or staffing, to really dive deep and capture that and process it. other small agencies might not have the funding to get the technology it takes to track this kind of thing and analyze it. So I don't want to seem like I'm, pointing fingers, like people aren't doing what they should be, because there's a lot of factors involved. There's just a lot of disparity between agencies on how that's tracked.
Yeah, and I think one of my regional takeaways in this conversation is really to sort of that we just have to have a conversation about how do we all track it similarly, right? Even if it's between Eugene, Springfield, and the sheriff's office, if we could get to some sort of similar standard that how we're approaching this important topic, it would make it easier to go, okay, are we doing better? Are we doing worse? How do we improve, right? To identify sort of upcoming trends. And, that's something that I would love to see us do in the next couple of years.
Yeah, that would be great to be able to compare to other agencies like that. And I agree. Right now, this is the first year we've been able to really capture this granular level of data. And so from my perspective and the agency's perspective, this is the baseline year to measure from moving forward, which is going to be very helpful because we haven't had this level of data in the past.
Yeah, and that there's some good background information for folks, right? The first year we did this, we've done this, I think 3 total years now. The first year was essentially a pie chart on a single sheet of paper. The second year was an actual report where I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Chief, that we went through every sort of police report and had to sort of hand tally everything. The third year is the one we just finished where we actually have software designed to track this. And then we had to put it together from there.
That's correct. Yeah.
All right. Ooh, we got some Q&As popping up. Okay. We're going to walk off the Q&A questions now. And I see some of that didn't raise their hand, but they dropped it in the Q&A section. So I'm going to read it to you, Chief. Do officers have access to language line in the field when encountering residents that speak different languages? If so, do officers call language line when making an arrest, reading the Miranda rights, or making contact?
I'm glad you brought that up. One of the things that we've accomplished over the last several months is we have provided smartphones to every single sworn member. So every single sworn member has a city-issued smartphone. In the past, we had, I think, an iPad that had the ability to get a language line and translator program and all that. So we have to bring somebody to see, and there was always a delay to do that. Now we have the ability to translate direct. Every officer has that ability through the use of their smartphone, and that's something that they absolutely utilize whenever necessary.
Perfect. So, Chief, while we're waiting for more questions, could you maybe talk a little bit about the survey? And I know you guys did a live stream yesterday with folks to talk through what, maybe what your takeaways are and, where you started with the actual survey and why we put it in the field.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, I mean, much like the use of force report this year, we needed a baseline to measure our performance off of moving forward. So back in late summer of 2021, we began researching some groups that would do surveys like this. We settled on one from Portland State University. So, and I think it was December, January-ish, all the surveys went out to the residents of the city. And it focused on several areas. I mean, it focused on people's essentially trust in SPD, their confidence in SPD. It focused on our ability to address public safety issues and ask for input from people to kind of prioritize what they thought their public safety priorities were. It asked questions regarding the level of legitimacy that people thought SPD had, specifically people that had interactions with the PD or been arrested by the PD, and questions such as, did you feel that the officers listened to you, treated you with respect? And there was a lot of good data that came out of that. I think what was most positive to me is that people's trust in SPD over the last 12 months had gone up. The amount of trust people had in PD and the willingness to work with the PD was relatively high, which I thought was a positive thing. One of the areas for improvement that we absolutely noticed was for community engagement and also follow-up. I mean, there's a perception from some people that when they make a police report and they never hear back, that nothing ever happened. So something we want to focus on moving forward is how can we improve our rating in years ahead for people's perception that we're following up on things, because we are. You know, it's a challenge right now because staffing is tough for us and every agency around here. So the follow-up might not be as quick or as often as we'd like it to be, but that's definitely an area that we're working on. As far as the community engagement goes, you know, people want to see us out there more, and I'm excited about the fact that some of the restrictions we've been under for the last couple of years have been lifted. Summer's coming, people are getting back to big events and group gatherings. And so it's a priority of ours to be out there and be seen and engage with the community absolutely as much as possible to try to rebuild some of these connections that may have been lost over the last couple of years, and then to always continually be trying to rebuild the trust that a police agency has to have from the community that they serve in order to be effective.
And I'm glad we're planning on doing it multiple years, right? Like that's going to help us sort of understand sort of the trend and how people are doing and try to get a constant feedback loop from the community.
Yeah, I think generally it's done probably every other year. So 2 years from now, we would engage in a survey with similar types of questions. So we have this baseline to measure off of.
Yeah. And is the report available? Is that report available online? Can people go to the website and download it?
Absolutely. Just go to the City of Springfield website, the police tab, and under the open data, it's one of the many things that we have listed on there.
And all right, so we've got a little bit harder of a question. And again, if people want to ask questions, feel free to raise your hands and we'll bring you up, or you can drop them into the Q&A chat and I will read them. This is a broader policy question. So there's my concerns regarding to the homeless and panhandling encroaching its way into Springfield from Eugene. Is there a preferred way for reporting this? Is there a plan for better or more enforcement? And if that person would be willing to come up, it might be a better if you can give a little bit more context, because I think that's a panhandling question. Oh, okay. All right. So
Yeah, Nicole, you should be able to unmute your microphone.
There we go. Can you hear me?
yes, we can.
Okay.
Thank you
I didn't know
for
if it would work.
coming
That's
up.
why I put it in the Q&A. Sorry. No, there's it's more for the panhandling, but also the homelessness that you see. I mean, I work in Eugene, so I see it a lot more, but as I go to Gateway and even like today at Albertsons on Main Street, there's somebody sleeping in the parking lot. And I just don't know, you know, with the increasing homelessness that I see in Eugene and the homelessness camps, some of that is starting to encroach its way into Springfield that I've noticed, and the panhandling has gotten significantly higher. And I know a number of years ago, it was put on the ballot, and I know that we made it illegal to, you know, hand things off from a car to a person on the street. And I know that, I mean, it's a petty thing. It's so minor. But I feel like if we are allowing the small stuff, then the bigger stuff is going to make its way. And it's just kind of like a gateway into broader problems. So I just don't know if there's, you know, if we're seeing a problem or if we're seeing a habit, or, you know, like if I constantly am seeing this person out by Albertsons, is there a preferred way that you guys have that reports it? Is there an online call non-emergency? You know, I just, as far coming from the police, is there a preferred way that you guys would want us to let you know where this problem is? And from a police standpoint, like, how can we enforce this and kind of, I don't want to say like take our city back, but make it the, you know, kind of let them know that that's not something that we want in Springfield?
Well, and let me give a little bit of commentary here, and then we'll see if we can, you know, see if the chief doesn't want to jump in. Like, one of the things that's important to realize is your housing status, right? Like, being homeless or unhoused or being between places is not illegal in the state of Oregon.
Right.
And I think one of the things that is important to sort of point out also is, and I think you called it out, right? Sometimes it's reported as a panhandling ordinance, and then, but it's not really a panhandling ordinance. It really is, if you're in the public right of way, you cannot hand something off out of your moving car. So it's not, you can stand there and panhandle, but you can't. You've got, like, the way the ordinance is written, if people can do it on private property, they just cannot be on a public street that do it. So Chief, maybe you could talk a little bit about, like, is there anything you guys are doing on panhandling, and then I can circle back and just talk about the broader, like, what's happening regionally.
Well, from a police perspective, thanks for asking that, Nicole. So we don't want to tolerate criminal activity, and that's really where we should get involved. So if you're witnessing what you think is criminal activity, depending on the severity of it and what's happening, you can call the non-emergency number, or you can even call 911 to report that criminal activity. We will come deal with that. If you are seeing activity that is concerning to you, where you think like maybe a cahoots responsibility to come check on a person because they're suffering some kind of crisis, or there's something going on where they need maybe not police help, but they clearly need some kind of help, go ahead and call the non-emergency line also, because we also dispatch cahoots to those calls. So we don't want people that need attention to not get the attention that they need and they deserve, whether that's somebody committing a crime or whether that's somebody suffering a crisis of some kind. We want to address it, but we can only address it if we get those calls, and we want those calls. We want to go deal with it. And as this becomes a bigger challenge for us, the more we know about it, the more calls we get, the more data we have, that's going to help inform us on what we can hopefully do to come up with good solutions. So please let us know if you see something like that.
And then I'll kind of jump in more broadly, right? Like Springfield always lives in kind of this unique situation where we're in an overlapping series of different levels of government. So the regional response to unhoused, right, like, is really like the Lane County government is the one that really provides a lot of the core services, as you see, right? And then they have the housing authority. We do have some money for building affordable housing, and we try to get that out through a variety of federal programs every year. And then just to give you a couple of other things where we've put additional money to again help with the housing issues, particularly. Like the city just voted money for so that Ann's Heart can find a location. And Ann's Heart is a nonprofit in town that really is trying to put together a shelter for women who are unhoused because they're fleeing domestic violence. Some of the other work that we're doing is, the city has historically supported what's called Oasis, which is a collaboration around G Street related to unhoused families. And then we have a overnight parking program that if churches want to host a Conestoga hut to help keep people housed. One of the most interesting things I think that is happening at the regional level is there's really a desire to sort of step back and change fundamentally what we're doing around unhoused issues. And I think that's probably a conversation that needs to happen, because how we're approaching and how we're spending money in a region around unhoused issues just isn't working. And we need to have a more broad, better response to that. And that conversation's floating around the elected officials right now. All right. Next question. In the last 20 years, we have seen the Latinx community growing here in Springfield. What is SPD doing to make sure that they are serving the Latinx community and let them know to feel safe and report or ask for help when needed? When will we see more Spanish-speaking staff at SPD?
That's a great question, and we are hiring right now. And so if you know of people that are multilingual, please have them get on the website and apply. We are always looking for new candidates from diverse backgrounds, diverse experiences, and that's something that's very important to us. I think it's important to the people of the city that we need to pursue. We do have Spanish speakers here. Do we want more? Absolutely. As far as building a level of trust with some of these historically underserved communities, like I mentioned earlier, one of the goals as we move into summer, and now that these restrictions we've been under have opened up, our goal is to reach out to every community within Springfield and sort of build back those relationships. And I think over time, as we build those relationships, it improves trust. And then when trust improves, people are more willing to kind of look at this as a career. But this has been a tough few years for law enforcement, and it's difficult to get people that want to do this job generally. And sometimes it feels like it's more difficult to get people from underserved communities that want to do this job. And so that's going to take a lot of work on the part of the police and on the part of the community, frankly, to all work together to try to convince people to take this on as a profession.
So could you give us a little bit more context about like how short are you from a patrol staffing perspective?
We are short. We are authorized 124 employees here. About 68 of those or 69 of those are sworn police officers. And we're down, I think, 14 or so police officers right now. So that's a significant percentage, because when you say there's a 69 sworn, I mean, that includes the chief, the lieutenants, the sergeants. So when you're down 13 or 14 officers out of the officer ranks, that's a huge percentage. We're gaining ground. We've got a lot of people in the pipeline. We actually have a testing process that starts this weekend. It's getting better, but it takes a tremendous amount of work because the applicant pool to be police officers is far smaller than it's ever been. I had the opportunity to spend some time a week ago with chiefs from all around the state. And it is frankly the same story in every agency in the state, and on the national level, we're seeing it as well. And I think it's partly because the policing profession is just challenging, but I think it's also, I see it in the private sector too. People are struggling to get employees. I know even the city is struggling to fill some of the vacancies they have. So there's a dynamic happening here now that is exacerbating some of the challenges that we were already facing in the law enforcement profession.
All right. And back to the question about relationship building, do you have a strategy about how you'll build those relationships? Is it will you have listening sessions to hear the community, especially those communities who have been historically excluded?
Yes. And I think having listening sessions, we have to go to where people are. We can't expect people to come to us. We can't even expect people to kind of meet us in the middle, whatever that is. We have to make a very deliberate effort to go where people are. And it's not easy. Sometimes we go where people are and we offer to be there, and they may be 2 people that show up first time. And that's okay. And we're going to do that. Then we're going to go back the next month and maybe there's 5 people that show up. But it's something that we are going to be very deliberate about doing, trying to reach out to all the different segments of Springfield, because the voice of every single person here is extremely important to us. And we serve everybody here, regardless of where you live or what your socioeconomic background is or anything else. And so, yeah, that's a high priority for us.
Good. And before we let you go, I'm going to end with 2 relatively easy questions. What are you reading right now?
Wow, that's a good question. I was given a book. I got sworn in a couple weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, called The Speed of Trust. It was given to me by somebody that I met when I first came here, and they're a well-respected community leader. So that's what I've started here recently. And I think, I don't think it's a surprise to anybody, but the premise of the book is trust is the most important component in every organization, every family, every business, every community. And if you don't have it, you're going to be ineffective and you're not going to reach any successes. But if you have trust, what comes along with that is speed and agility to get things done. So if you have to build that trust over time. We want to focus on that and do it as quickly as we can, because with trust, you can get things done. And without it, you can have the best ideas in the world, but you're not going to get anywhere. And that's both internally within the organization and externally throughout the city. So that's what I'm reading right now.
It's a good book. I'm glad you're reading it. So let's go ahead and bring David up and just make sure that we don't have, if we're ready to kind of move on past policing, but if you still have a policing conversation, we can definitely fit that in.
David, you should be able to unmute.
Yes, I have. Thank you very much. I was born and raised here. Excuse me. And I've seen poor city management, and I've seen abhorrent policing, and unfortunately been a victim of that. I just want to tell you both how far we've come and what a shining example you both are to this community. I just wish the majority of Springfield would understand how far we've come and how exemplary you both are at what you do and what you brought to the city, and how much a part you are of making Springfield a destination city. If you had told me 10 years ago that Springfield would be a destination city where people that are visiting Portland would go out of their way to visit, I would have had to pull you aside and give you a reality check. But I'm just so proud of how far we've come and how you both and your support staff, your excellent support staff, have brought my hometown. Thank you.
Well, thanks. We appreciate that.
Thank you,
All
sir. That means a tremendous amount. Thank you very much.
And then I have one more question in the Q&A I'm gonna give you, because apparently I missed it. So if an officer has multiple negative incidents with the community and folks feel unsafe having him as an officer, why does the department still have these officers employed?
That's a super easy question. I'm being facetious. So, I mean, that's fair. I hear what you're saying. That's fairly vague. So basically, if we have officers that have a history of discipline issues and things like that, I mean, we are bound by labor law and how we deal with that. We take accountability very seriously. When people levy complaints against our officers, we investigate them. If they violated our policies or procedures, depending on the egregiousness of that, we will hold them accountable. We don't want bad officers. I don't think any agency does. And I don't think we have any bad officers here. I think if there were officers that things were brought to our attention, that we investigated, and we take that extremely seriously, because I don't want a community that doesn't trust their police department. So I guess the short answer is we take that very seriously. And as far as looking back on a statement like that, I mean, that's a hard one to answer because it's kind of vague, but accountability is extremely important to us.
So here's what I would recommend before we let you go. For that, it was listed as anonymous in the Q&A. If you have that, if you're the person that has that question, if you can just reach out directly to Chief Shearer so that you guys can have a conversation, you know, sort of offline, where you could get into some specifics and he can hear your concern. That would probably give him more insight to respond to. We can't obviously look up who you are because it's anonymous, but if you can look up the, you know, Chief Shearer's email on the police department website, then that would help. All right. Well, Chief, our time with you has come and gone. It went quicker than what I expected. So I really appreciate you coming and just answering some of those basic questions. Have a great night. Enjoy the rest of your evening.
Absolutely. I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you both. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you guys for asking additional questions. We can move on to other concerns that people have on their mind. Again, same mechanic, but this time it's just going to be me answering the questions. So feel free to raise your hand and then we can bring you on up. I've got a couple of things that were outlined in the, looks like we got our first folks. I've got a couple of things that are outlined that I can cover to fill in between. So Neil, if you want to bring James up.
Yeah, so James, you should be able to unmute your microphone now.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, we got you.
Hello. So yeah, first, before I start, Sean, that was really good answering those questions the way you did and bringing up those questions and whatnot. That was really good. Thank you for, it sounds like you've been paying attention to all of us concerned citizens about the cops. So good job. So I'm asking you to kind of get involved with this environmental justice concern that I have and here in town. And apparently there's many other concerned citizens about the same concerns I have about international paper and then other industries in Springfield. And so at the end of this month, I think May 28th is what I think the day we decided. We're gonna do with Beyond Toxics. They're gonna help me do a Zoom meeting, and I was hoping that you would have the time to, get involved and participate with the conversation, and just not add to the conversation, just listen to what everybody else is saying about these concerns, and kind of go from there. And then maybe after that conversation, you might feel more comfortable helping get a committee created where we address these concerns. So yeah, that's basically all I wanted to say, and appreciate you. And yeah.
So James, I'm not committing that I'm going to do it today, but if you send me the email with the information, I will take a look at the.
For sure.
Yeah, and then
I don't even know if it's that day. We're shooting for that day. It might be sometime in June.
Perfect.
It'll be way organized, and we'll just send you the email, and hopefully you'll be able to attend.
Oh, well,
And Neil, hopefully you can attend too. Love to have you too.
So there's, I think there's another portion to your question, right? And, and maybe this is lined up for kind of a longer conversation. And I know you've been asking about sort of environmental justice issues for a while. And I think for a little that, I think when you look at the sort of regulatory framework that the city's sort of working under right now, there's a couple of places where like our transportation planning is really switching, to address sort of climate change. And some of that conversation is happening around what's called the regional transportation plan, which is something that happens at the big regional metro, the agency that spends the federal dollars, right? So, and then there's another rulemaking process that exists at the state level right now that is called the Climate Friendly and Equitable Communities Initiative. The city's been pretty involved with giving feedback to try to, this was sort of in response to the communities rules, the Governor Brown's executive order to address climate change. And again, we're giving feedback as that planning process comes in. The thing that I think is important about that planning process is that is probably the biggest planning initiative since the Oregon state land use laws were created in the late 70s, early 80s, right? So there's a lot of things that are on pause right now and not just in Springfield, but Lane County regionally until people understand what the state's going to ask them to do. But we've spent a significant amount of time as a city and we spent a significant amount of time as a community sort of advocating for what would make those rules work effectively. And I guess tomorrow that the elected officials will be out doing a tree planting event as part of Arbor Day. So one of the commitments that I've made is I want to see us increase our overall tree canopy, and it's something that's pretty simple, but it would it's something that would make a significant difference to the sort of the livability of the city. And I welcomed the Friends of Trees planting, I think it was last Saturday. They planted 45 trees, right? And just to give you some context for how hard people are working around just putting in more street trees. Probably in 2020, we planted 40 trees total as a city, right? And just to see that in one sitting, we did 45 the last time around is a significant step forward. And I know that Public Works is also looking at a program that would use what's called CDBG money to help grind down stumps and remove sort of old stumps in some of the middle part of Springfield to make room in the public right of way to have to add additional trees to the landscape. All right. Thanks, James.
Thank you.
All right. I'm going to check the question queue and see I've seen some hands pop up and down. If you've got additional questions, I'm happy to take them. Recently, we just went back to what's called United Front. That is the annual lobbying trip that government partners in the area take to Washington, D.C., and just to simply talk about regional initiatives. So that's Lane County, that's the city of Eugene, city of Springfield, LTD, schools in the Park District. One of the two big priorities we chose as a city was focusing on the 42nd Street levee, which is that physical barrier that sits out along 42nd Street that is flood protection for most of North Springfield. This project came around a couple of years ago. Up until that point, we didn't even know that what the levee was made of. At one point, we had to bore into the levee to get samples. But like, if you look, when you talk to the Corps of Engineers, right, the Corps of Engineers is really saying that it's not like, it probably works, but it's not up to modern design standards. So we've been working on getting money from the Corps of Engineers to replace that. And we've gone a long way. It's been prioritized, it's been funded. We're waiting on folks to get assigned for it, but like, that is probably the number one regional priority we took to the federal government. Just simply because it keeps our homes safe. It keeps us out of flood insurance, like most of Springfield, out of flood insurance. And, from an emergency response perspective, that we want to make sure, and it's sort of a changing climate and changing atmosphere, that we have protection from a flood event. Other things that are going on, Main Street Safety Plan. That's been something you've seen in the news the last couple of weeks. The city council was originally going to open a public hearing on the 2nd of May. The Main Street Safety Plan, it's enormous. That's the plan that you've seen in Main Street that is what's called a facility plan. And that really is designed to kind of say, okay, ODOT, this is our vision for where the community is. And this is where this is what we want to have happen with your facility in the city of Springfield. So once we would adopt a facility plan, then ODOT would work on over 25 years beginning to implement it. The issue really is coming down to this, is that while we balance economic growth and safety and transit and all those issues around Main Street, it just needs more time. We've got concerns from business owners about everything from parking all the way from, we've got some highly engaged business owners that are concerned about, is this the right treatment? Or maybe they're giving us suggestions that say, hey, we need more lights, or we need better crossings in different places. The amount of public feedback coming back to us is significant. And the way I've set it up and the way that I envisioned it was that we spend some time talking about it as a council before the early part of the break. And then we take our summer break, and then we can kind of start crafting and making changes and really responding to community feedback in the fall. And then we can move on to adoption in February 2023. Now, to me, right, like, that makes sense, because ultimately we've been through about 3 Main Street planning processes in the last 10 years, and getting to something that, if we can get to something we agree on, that at least gives us a core vision about where we want to go. And that keeps us from out of this constant cycle of having to do these Main Street planning processes, or wondering like, why, how are we going to improve Main Street? What are we going to do? And I would just offer this, that Main Street remains, it's 7 miles long, right? It goes from, sometimes it looks and acts like a main street. Sometimes it looks and acts like a freight highway. And sometimes, it's people's, transportation where they're walking or biking through it. And it's complex, and it's narrow and tight in certain places. And I would just ask people's patience and and for them to continue to engage in the process, to make sure that they get the feedback and the response that they're looking for. That if you go to ourmainstreetspringfield.org, there will be a place that you can sign up for an email newsletter. That's probably the number one thing that you can do to get constant newsletters about what's going on Main Street. All right. If you come up with it, we have questions in the Q&A here. Okay, so here's the question that I've got. As mayor, how will you bridge the gaps between historically excluded communities and the city to make sure information is updated and sent to areas that folks live, shop, and get resources from, like the ARC and other agencies? That's a really great question. So this, so a lot of times it really comes down to relationship building, right? Like, and one of the best things that we did is a program, is just really kind of get out there into the community. We have a program called CityLink right now that is it is designed to show and talk about everything that happens in the city. And sort of, when I was on city council, it would have been great training for me to have my first day on city council. The goal of CityLink was to really empower folks that don't usually run in, in the civic leadership circles, but may be leaders in other circles in the community, and share with them information, contact information, how to get how to sort of touch the city and getting information from the city about what's actually going on. The other couple of things that we're doing is we've got a lot of e-newsletters that go on. We're translating more material, and we're getting a lot of help from community groups to do that than we ever have. And then we're looking for, I look for a lot of events that I can just simply go to and show up to so that people know, who I am, who the city council is, and that we can give out additional numbers. What I would tell you is getting information about the city. That's been one of the ideas of why I came up with this as a format, is probably one of the biggest challenges that we have as an organization. It's not unique to Springfield, but it is, the reality is most people are just trying to get through their lives and get the kids in bed or get the homework done so that we can do it all over again tomorrow. I'm open to additional ideas about what would help people just learn about what's going on in the city. But like I said, we're using every format that we possibly can to put additional information out. That doesn't mean that we've got them all covered, but we do want to make sure that the information's there so we get the feedback we need. All right, Neil, we got David with his hand up.
Yes, and Mayor, if I could just add, if you don't mind, as we talk about things that we're doing and reaching out to underrepresented or underserved areas of the community, even the tree planting that you have championed throughout Springfield, we're partnering now with the NAACP. They have a new environmental justice coordinator who we've been working with. They also have a tree planting program. So we're working with Springfield, Willamette Lane, and NAACP to see where we can partner and really do these projects together. So that's just another way where we're kind of sharing information and then turning that into a positive partnership. And David, your hand is up, so I will unmute your microphone and you should be able to do that now.
Mayor VanGordon, I hope people realize, James included, how you do not get paid for what you do as a mayor, and you still hold down a fabulous full-time job and continue to raise and spend time with your fabulous family. So you don't have a whole lot of extra time to attend things that you have little ability to affect. And so I would hope that we would all understand that we need you to continue to be focused on those things you can affect, because you do not have 48 hours in one day. But you manage, like my father said, people like you put 10 pounds of manure in a 5-pound sack. And we so appreciate that. I mean, those of us that understand what you are doing for us. And I've personally known most every mayor since Ed Harms. And you are a treasure. And I just hope that our citizenry understands that now. They will eventually. You'll have stuff named after you. Not in my lifetime, because, But anyway, I just want to thank you, and I just want people to understand the scope of what you can do and what you cannot do. And don't try to take the time away from the things you can do by their personal causes, which might be best directed in other areas and their energies. Thank you.
Thank you,
Mayor.
David. All right. And Johannes, I saw your hand pop up and come back down. So, oh, there you are.
Okay, Johannes, you should be able to unmute your microphone now.
Hey, Sean, and folks who are listening in the community. I do want to acknowledge a lot of the positive changes that have been happening since you were mayor, but I do want to acknowledge the fact that you all are elected officials and we did vote for you all, and you all did sign up to be able to speak and not speak, to be in these positions. So I hope that you do find the time and prioritize other spaces, and especially the voices who have been underserved. I don't really have a question, but I just felt like I needed to make that response according after the last book. But oh, I guess I do have a question.
Sure.
Here, let me pull one up real quick. This is a common question that I get a lot. So we hear rumors about drones. Can you talk about them and what they are used for? And how can residents protect their privacy if they are currently being operated?
I wish you would have asked that question. Oh, Chief Shearer is still here. So Neil, could we tag Chief Shearer in?
That Chief, you should also be able to unmute your microphone now
We're doing this on the fly.
if he's around.
All right. Well, I'm going to start and then let the chief jump in when he gets here. He may have stepped away from his desk. Did you hear the question, Chief? No. So the PD does have a drone program right now. There's very, very specific state laws on what you can use drones for and what you can't use drones for. I am not an expert in it by any means. That really is right, like that the PD can really kind of help us through this, but we have to have a drone program. We have to be compliant with what state law says. So the other piece about it is that city council, okayed going into a pilot program, and specifically it was about to find out and understand, like, how do we approach this as a region? How do we partner with Eugene PD? And then how do we take this other tool and find a use that makes sense? The two things that really stuck out to me when they brought the use cases forward to council, it's not about, it's not all about sort of like arrests and breaking down doors. Sometimes it's about finding folks that may have walked away. Sometimes like in the recent fire on Main Street, it was used. The police were out there flying the drone to help the fire department understand what hotspots to put down and how to effectively attack a fire. Right. So the ranges use range dramatically. Chief, did you make it back? But I know, Johannes, this is going to be a constant set of questions over the next year, and please keep them coming. And anybody that's got questions, we need to get them answered. The other piece is, after a year, we're going to sit down and talk about it at council about, what do we want to do? What have we used it for? Are we getting the benefit about it? I'm confident that as a tool, it can be used effectively. But that means we also have to balance that with what you just described, which is, hey, we don't need drones up. We don't need to violate people's privacy, right? Like, we need to use them in a very specific, very narrow window. And especially, I have constantly heard the concerns about, the idea that you would surveil, people freely exercising, their First Amendment rights. Chief.
Mayor, we may be having some microphone problems. So Chief, I'm going to do one quick thing. You're going to see something come up on your screen. You should be able to choose that.
All right, I'm back.
Okay.
Question was around drones. I heard what you were just saying about the drones. Yeah, there's very specific, and we talked to council about this. And I think the policy now we even got on the website so people can read the policy. You know, there's been over a number of years, probably at least 10 years, legislation at the state and federal level that's been enacted. Drone programs have been around for years and years and years. And so there are very strict requirements that an agency has to meet in order to have this program. And we are absolutely meeting those requirements. We are documenting every time we deploy it, how long we deploy it. We can track exactly where it is, the elevation, how long it was in the air. So if somebody were to file a complaint about a drone being ours, we can absolutely tell if it was one of ours. In fact, the drones are clearly marked with SPD on them. So if they're flying around, you're going to be able to tell it's one of ours. We want to be very transparent about that. Like the mayor said, it's not just about using it to make an arrest per se. There's a tremendous amount of uses for it. And really what's most attractive to me personally about it is it is a risk mitigation tool. It's a de-escalation tool. It allows us to see things, potentially dangerous people far before we would have to put an officer, to confront them in a backyard, for example. The drone might find them 2 blocks away, hiding behind some bushes, where without the drone, it might take a police officer coming around the corner in a backyard dark one night and actually bumping into the person before they even realize where they're there, which could end up in an outcome that nobody wants.
Actually not on the front page.
Say again?
You're not on mute, Johannes. So did you have something for us, or were you talking to somebody in the background?
I was talking to somebody in the background, but I did go on the page on SPD since I'm still on the line, but I don't see it on the front page. Is that part of the welcome to letter from the chief, or?
The drone policy?
Yes.
It should be on there, but I don't have the page pulled up in front of me, so I can't tell you exactly where to look. But I will, as soon as I get out of here, we will confirm it's there. If it's not on there, it will be on there before the end of the night, but I'm 98% sure that it's on there somewhere.
Thank you.
So, and yeah, we'll try to mail you out a link because you had to use that to register. All right, we're on the home stretch, folks. I know we got a couple more questions, and then then we can let folks go. So I appreciate you guys hanging in there for the last hour with me. I would like to see more information available in Spanish for Springfield residents. I continue to hear that the Latinx community has no clue of what is happening in Springfield. For example, the Main Street project. My father has several small businesses on Main Street in 21st, and he had no clue about the project. How are you reaching out to Latinx business owners on Main Street in all of Springfield? The translation issue, I just want to acknowledge that's a work in progress. We've got to get more material translated into Spanish. And specific to the Main Street program, we've got a lot of different businesses that feel like they haven't been contacted, they haven't shared, gotten information shared with them. That's one of the reasons why we're taking a little extra time so that we can make additional calls, and that we can reach out to businesses and just talk about, well, what does the plan mean? How do you get involved? The two things, well, I guess it's one thing I would ask from your father, and one thing that I would ask or suggest that he does. If you have questions, right, about what the Main Street project means, please help him get registered for the newsletter that comes off of our Springfield Main Street. The second piece that I think is that is important is if you have a piece of property on Main Street, the email is info@ourmainstreetspringfield.org. The staff is fielding questions constantly, and they will be all summer about, well, what does this plan mean for my piece of property? How do I get the information out? And then lastly, Councilor Woodrow and I have had a couple of meetings along Main Street where people just want to sit and chat and say, they've hosted, coffees for us just to talk about what's going on and what their concerns are. That offer is out to you. If you would help us connect. And so, all right. let's go ahead and bring David up, and then we got one more question in the queue after that, and then we will wrap up.
All right, and Mayor, just a reminder for folks, on the website under Springfield Police Department, on the left side, there's a Department Policies tab, and that's where that is. And maybe the chief will is talking about moving that, but that's where you can find it right now. And David, you should be able to unmute your microphone.
Thank you. Mayor VanGordon, I just want people to understand, I'm a significant property owner on the affected place on Main Street. And I just wish people would understand that this is a projection and plan over 20 years and not a project that, okay, we're gonna, do the 7 miles from 21st to 72nd right now, and we're gonna tear up everything and we're gonna destroy businesses and everything else. No, and this doesn't even have funding.
Yeah.
We have to create a plan and a vision to present to funding sources to say, this is our long range plan. And people do not realize or seem to realize that what we have today in the way of transportation is what we're going to have in 10 or even 30 years from now. There's going to be a lot of autonomous traffic quicker than we realize. And roundabouts, when properly constructed, as we have seen in our city already, which have been given awards, it makes traffic flow quicker and safer in every scenario, other than when they're first implemented, because people take the data when they're first implemented and, oh, they caused all these accidents because people didn't know how to use them. But once you look a year later, everything is beautiful. And so I just wish people would just step back and realize this is not a project. This is a proposal with many different sections and over 20 years.
That is a really good call out. So the best way to think about this is it is not an engineered design at all, right? The engineers have not really gotten a tape and measured out, well, how big's the roundabout going to be, or how much, any of that. Really, it is about framing up what we want different sections of Main Street to look like over 20 years.
Precisely.
And that's why it's, we had a pandemic, like this project started probably in 2017 or 2018, and we had a pandemic in between. So it's,
but there's been so many entities involved with this, and not only just the city of Springfield, but those that you've brought in, your partners and the like,
yeah.
that have made this so solid. But that doesn't mean it's final. It means this is our overview. This is our look 30 to 50 years in the future.
Yes.
And so many people want things to just stay the way they are today because that's what they're comfortable with, but they don't foresee the changes in transportation technology that is on our doorstep.
Well, and that's sort of the, I guess, some of the important context, right? Like when we've lost a lot of projects, meaning that like the conversation in the community has just sort of, died down because everything in 2020 was frankly about 2020.
Right.
And taking a second to pull back and just reground people about what this is, make sure we've got their feedback, make sure we all are at a moment where we can kind of put our hands in the middle about it. And respond to stuff that's frankly legitimate. Lights on Main Street help, pullouts help, right? Like, maybe,
Yes.
so we just got to work through it. We will be fine in the end. Taking additional time is gonna help us.
But Main Street's no longer the main wagon road, and it has developed over time and morphed over time many, many times. This is just another step into the future.
Yep.
And we have to accept it. And there are sacrifices to be made, rest assured, but there is much to be gained in the future.
Yes. Perfect. Thanks, David. And I'm going to read the last question.
Good night.
then I will let you guys go. In view of the $10 million lawsuits, and unresolved and lack of trust in the community, do you support the creation of a civilian review board so that we can communicate directly with the police chief and officers to establish more trust and positive interactions? Well, there's a lot there. And what I've kind of said is like, there's a lot of different models. I'm reading information that people brought to me about what civilian review boards look like. I know that there's interest in having that conversation. Frankly, I'm still curious and reading on my own. The one thing I can tell you is that if you've got questions with the PD, right, like some of that isn't just necessary, that's not just structure that we can put in place, right? Like I would encourage you to get with your city councilor, get with myself, and like, let's get them answered so that people understand. Let's look for different avenues to bring Chief Shearer up and talk about what do we do from here. The other thing that I've committed to doing is just understanding that in Springfield, and cities range in different governance structures, and there's a lot of details that we can sort of talk about it. But in Springfield, the center of the policy making is the Springfield City Council. And one of the things that I set out this year to help with that trust conversation is to make sure that at least once a quarter, we're bringing police work forward and talking about it at work session in front of the council so that we as elected officials both get updates, we have an avenue to answer questions and concerns, and then we have an avenue to just really understand what's going on with policing. I joined city council in 2011, and we've spent more time with police as an issue, as a question in front of us than we ever have. And I think that's productive to driving transparency and clarity about, just answering the question, how do we want to be policed as a community? Because public safety is a really important topic, because we want your family and we want you and we want your property to be safe. So there's a lot of we've come a long way, but there's a lot of conversation still to happen. And I would just encourage people to stay engaged. With that, we've gone about 15 minutes over. Like I said, I'm planning on doing this 3 times a year just to get in front of folks, answer their questions. The off time that I've planned to do it, I plan to do State of the City. So there's a pretty big event for there. But please feel free to give me a call. Some of you folks on here have, emailed me before. We talk regularly. We just have a conversation about what's going on in Springfield and why it's important. I really appreciate your time and really appreciate you coming in, getting updates and getting some of your questions answered. So have a great evening, everybody.